All right, Ed.
Let's go.
Let's do this.
All right.
All right. So listen, in the book,
Yeah.
right, you cover off the regulatory climate here in Canada. You compare what we're doing here in Canada or not doing here in Canada to what's going on in GDPR. I get questions all the time about what's coming next in Canada because we're not there. We're far from it. It's like we're almost in a wait state waiting for something to happen. Where do you see it going?
Yes, I think GDPR was a pioneering regulation, and what I expect is Canada's going to look very closely about how it's enforced and how it's modified. And I think in the next 18 to 24 months, we can expect some kind of GDPR-like regulation in Canada. I think the first movement of that in November is going to be the notification requirements, and I think that's the first step of many that we're going to start seeing. I think consumer protection will be at the forefront both of government requirements and consumer demand.
You know, it's funny, you jumped into the consumer side of things because IoT is everything right now. And right now in Canada, forget about Canada, around the world, there are no regulations around IoT devices and securing them. What are we going to do about that here?
Yeah, so California just passed a law that's going into effect where it will require IoT manufacturers to make the devices upgradable, have specific requirements about unique passwords. And so you can expect those kinds of regulations to permeate throughout the industry. So California is the 8th largest economy in the world. What California does, we'll feel it here.
So I've read the law, and they don't cover off things like encryption. They don't talk about right to forget. They don't talk about a lot of things. There's a lot of gaps. How do we as a country address those gaps?
Yeah, I think so. If you look at the US regulation, the reason they left those out is because they understand that regulation moves much slower than technology.
Yep.
And they thought that if they incorporate that into the regulation, it won't be fast enough to keep up with the risks in the industry. So what they want to do is they want to rely on government regulatory bodies to determine what's good enough security. So what is the right level of encryption? And I think we'll start seeing the same thing in Canada with our own agencies. We'll start seeing them implement rules about what's good enough security today, and they'll have the flexibility to modify it in the future.
There's so much data being collected today, not only by our governments, but by private enterprise and other organizations. They've created this enormous data lake. Now, you might know a thing or two about artificial intelligence, which I still don't believe exists at this point in time in its purest form, but maybe I'll call it machine learning. Can you talk to me about the role that machine learning is going to play in enforcing regulatory compliance?
Yeah, I think the first step is going to be how we regulate in Canada. So if you look at GDPR, GDPR is a preventative regulation. It means you have to get consent before you incorporate the data and before you use it. If you look at the California law, the CCPA, that one is a reactive law. You can collect the data and then you have to give the consumer an option to opt out. The risk with AI is if you do an opt-out model, the risk is you're going to have already built a profile on the user. So even if you remove the data, the profile is still going to be leveraged, right? So I think what Canada has to do and what probably will do is adopt the GDPR model eventually, where the data will not be allowed to be ingested unless there's a specific, explicit approval by the customer.
Last question for you. For the last 20 years, I've been told to remember everything, log everything, keep everything, back everything up. How do you shift that culture to the right to forget?
Yeah, so I think the right to forget doesn't mean you get rid of all of that. I think it's forcing companies to take a different stand. I think what GDPR did is it forced companies to perform spring cleaning, right? It forced them to look at their processes with a new, fresh look and to figure out, okay, you know, we have all these processes in place. Right to forget doesn't mean you can't use that data. It just means you have to have an option to get rid of it.